Welcome to Shoulda Known. I am Venomous, and with me as always is my heterosexual life mate,
Titan.
And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing raising LGBTQ children.
And hopefully by sharing these stories, you can learn from some of our mistakes and realize that you're not alone.
As always, we would love to interact with you, so please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. All right, Titan. So, let's get into it. Titan.
Yeah.
You have an LGBTQ plus child. What has that been like for you? And how did your child, when did you know that your child was LGBTQ plus?
Yeah. So my child came out to me twice, actually. First time he was 11, and he was born biologically female, and he came out to me, I guess, like I said, about 11 years old. And at that point, there had been no indication prior to of any other, thoughts of anything. And so when he came out, he's like, listen, I identify as male, and I think that, blah, blah, blah. This is where I didn't handle it so great. So we're going to record how I didn't handle it so great. So I kind of pushed back and I was like, well, just because you like to wear boys' clothes or like to do boys' things doesn't mean that you're transgender. It just means that maybe you're a tomboy. I said, there are levels, to how you can identify yourself. I said, listen, you're only 11 years old. Let's not put a label on something. You don't really know who you are, until you get much older, honestly, probably until you're in your 30s before you really know who you are as a person. So I said, well, let's not throw labels on it. So I kind of pushed back, and I always kind of feel bad about that. About 6 months later, I guess, his mom came to me and said, listen, he wants to come out to you. He wants to tell you that, he's transgender, so on and so forth. And I said, okay. I said, well, I'm going to support it. Between the suicide rate for transgender children being so high, not to mention family history, as we spoke about in the last episode.
Yeah.
I was like, we're going to support it, period. Like that's
right.
it. And so a couple days later, he came to me and he's like, listen, he's like, I wanted to tell you, he's like, I do identify as a boy, and I'd like to be called, I think Nick was the name that he said he wanted to be called. Yeah, that he chose. And I said, listen, I said, I will support you 100%. I said, let's go today and let's go buy you some boys' clothes so that you can feel more comfortable, things of that nature. I said, but you don't get to pick your name. I said, none of us get to pick our name. You're given a name. So I said, okay, well then, in that case, if you'd have been biologically born male, your name would have been X or Y, as a shortened version of that. And he was like, okay, well, let me think about it, and let you know. I was like, okay. So, a couple hours later, he comes back and goes, yeah, I'd like to go by Y. I was like, okay, sounds great. And so that's what we call him.
Did he push back at all? Or did he just kind of like, okay, well, let me think about it?
Well, he said, let me think about it. But it was like an hour or two later. He was just like,
so
okay, yeah, call me.
He really didn't think about it very long.
Correct. Yeah, it wasn't very long. I mean, because it's a very common name kind of thing. So I think he was okay with it. Very masculine sounding name. So it fit what he was looking to achieve. But yeah, then we went shopping for clothes, took him to get him some clothes. And, it was kind of funny because he's slender, but because he has hips, we had to buy him husky sized clothes to get on the hips.
Okay.
So that was always kind of funny because he's like, I'm not husky. I'm like, no, I know you're not husky, but trust me, you've got some hips right now, so you have to get around those. So because this was, I think by this
you
point,
should have been like, you're
12.
built like your daddy. You're built like your daddy, kid.
He's definitely got my thighs and my rear end. So I have a pretty good rear end, so I'm happy with it. But so that was my experience, with him, and how we went on with that. And I believe it's your daughter that's LGBTQ. Is that
Before
correct?
we go there, I want to ask you a follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, how about
it? So before he came out, you said he was 11. I mean, what was he like, right? Like, so did you personally observe that he was tomboyish and that he kind of gravitated towards male things? Like any observation? Not in hindsight, probably things probably
Right,
stand out to
right, right,
you,
right.
but
Yeah. Actually, the opposite. Nothing stood out. Like even I look back now, and it's like, yeah, you were wearing dresses and okay wearing dresses, not
mm,
even, you know, 3 weeks ago or
yeah,
whatever. So that's where it was really kind of a shock, and I think that's why initially I did push back to some extent because it's like, yeah, you've given me no indication at all. You know, I mean, when it comes to doing boy things, which you know, learning from him over the last several years, going through this, I've learned that that's a stupid thing to say in the first place. But you know, he played with toys, both
yeah,
dolls, you know, Barbies and things like that, and other brands, you know, Monster High, stuff like that, but also,
sure,
uh, you know, boys' toys as well. Which, to be fair, it's because, in my opinion, they're much more fun. They do a lot more things
yeah.
than a Barbie doll does. So I can understand why they would want to play with them. Honestly, I mean, growing up, I had Transformers and GI Joes and He-Man, so way more fun than a Barbie doll, in my opinion. So yeah,
Well, makes
that
sense.
was
Yeah, that makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah, so I have twin sisters. One of them is
yep,
gay. And
okay,
growing up, we always knew that she was a little different. When you're
right,
little, you don't really know how to what label to put on it or what it really is. But she was always one of them is very super feminine,
right,
almost to an extreme. And my gay sister is not. She's always been very tomboyish. And my
right,
mom loved dressing them together or dressing them identical because they're identical twins.
right. Twins, yeah.
And if you look at pictures, you see one that is as happy as can be wearing her dress, and the other one looks miserable. So with her, we just always knew that there was, you know, there was something there that was a little different. So when she came out,
Right.
there was no surprise by anybody.
Sure. Yeah. So are you able to kind of share that story? Like, how did they really come out? Because I mean, I've had friends that came out and were like, "Oh, by the way, I'm gay," and it's like, "Yeah, no, duh, we knew that." Like, you knew that? It's like, "Yeah, we already knew that." Like, it wasn't a surprise to
Yeah,
us. Like, "Oh, why'd you
right.
say anything?" Because, well, that's your story to tell, not ours. So,
Exactly,
uh,
exactly.
but
So both of my sisters came out to my mom. So one of them came out as bi,
sure.
and I think if I remember correctly, I don't remember whether she came out more than once or not, or what the whole deal was.
Yeah.
But now, fast forward to adulthood, I don't know if she still
Hmm.
considers herself as being bi, but the other one definitely gay. And
Yeah.
so they both, and I don't remember whether they did it at the same time or whether it was one of those things where one did it and then the other one did it. I don't
Hmm.
remember all the details. However, I do remember my mom's reaction. I think it was with the one that was bi. And my
Okay.
mom's reaction was not great. It
Sure.
was very much, well, you're too young to know. How do you really
Hmm.
know? Ta da da da. And in her
Right.
mind, she was worried about the stigma and the sort of life that either one of them could possibly be living, right?
Sure.
With that label on, on them. My mom also was raised. Uh, she went to church and was
Hmm.
involved in church and all that sort of stuff. Growing up, she took us to church.
Sure.
Now, things change, people evolve, and that's not
Mhm.
doesn't happen very often. But in church, they tell you that that is not natural, and that is a very, very, very bad thing, and that it is a sin.
Right.
So
Yeah.
she kind of had that context in her life to frame the situation in front of her, and so her reaction. She admits today that it really them coming out was not really a
Hmm.
big deal, and she never should
Right.
have made a big deal about it. But
Hmm.
but at the time, that's just the way that the way that she reacted. Now, she did not let that affect her relationship with either of them. So she
Right.
kind of had the initial shock, and then very quickly after that was like, okay, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Yeah. So how long ago was that? Or how old were they, I guess, maybe is
So
a better way to
they
put it.
were older.
So you don't
They were
date
older
yourself.
than. Yeah, so they were older than your son. So they were already
Okay.
teenagers at this point.
Oh,
And
okay.
at that point you are doing self-discovery, right? And so
Sure.
she just thought that it was just part of just self-discovery,
Yeah.
and that's the way she handled it.
Something you said about, and it's not just people from a religious aspect thing that I think is always funny, is they say, oh, it's not natural to, for it to be gay or bi or whatever. And it's like, really? Because there are plenty of animals that have no
Exactly.
problems having relations with the same sex. I mean,
Yep.
and it's funny because they always say that, and it's like, oh, really? Because I've seen video of lions doing it to another male lion, and
Hmm.
or a buck, with deer doing it. It's just, I think it's always funny. It's like, yeah, it does happen all the time. So it's perfectly
Absolutely,
natural.
perfectly
There's nothing
natural
wrong with it.
thing. There are many
Yeah.
examples of that in the throughout the rest of the animal kingdom, and
Yep.
it could many people describe it as a sliding scale, right? On one end you can be super masculine, and super heterosexual, and the other end you may be the complete opposite of that, and so some people
Hmm.
believe that you kind of everyone falls somewhere in between both of those extremes.
Yeah.
I don't know how
Yeah.
truth that is. I don't know how scientifically backed that is, right? But
Right.
again, goes to show it kind of helps explain the different varieties of
Hmm.
sexuality that there are out there.
Right. Um, so that was your sister, but don't you have a child that's also identifies as LGBTQ, or am I
Yes.
wrong in that?
Yeah, my daughter. Yeah,
Okay.
so my daughter, she came out to us when she was in the 5th grade.
Okay.
And it was one of those things where she always had these feelings, but really
Hmm.
didn't know what they were or how to describe
Right.
them. And she was telling me, she was
Okay.
like, yeah, I kind of looked up my feelings online.
Hmm.
And when I read it back, I realized, oh, I'm gay. That's what
Right.
this is.
Okay.
Because, when you're that young, not people don't have experience. There's still a lot of innocence there,
Sure.
and they just don't know. From her perspective, she knew that she liked girls.
Right.
And and that was it, right? Like there wasn't a whole lot of complicated things behind it. Now growing up,
Hmm.
she
Right.
she is very effeminate, right? Like she's not
Hmm.
non-effeminate in any way whatsoever. Always played with dolls, always had the whole, you mentioned Monster High. um and she still is into very, very, very traditionally girly things.
Yeah.
So she just happens to, you know
Like
like
other girls.
girls. Yeah.
I think that's the thing, from us, especially, our childhood, our upbringing, the way society was at that time. You make the assumption like, oh, well, if a woman is gay, then she's obviously going to be, very masculine or whatever. And it's like,
Right.
no, that's, you go back to that sliding scale that I don't know how accurate it is, but I will say that I've learned so much regarding the various ways people can identify, whether sexually or through their gender identity, things of that nature.
Yeah.
And I don't always understand it. And that's one thing I explained to my son when he came out both times. I said, listen, it's something I don't understand. I can get how a man can look at another man and be attracted to that man. I can see how a
Sure.
woman can do that. I can see how you can like
Yep.
both. I get that. I don't understand the concept of saying, okay, I know I have male genitalia, but I feel like I'm a woman. I just don't
Hmm.
understand it. Now, what I've learned to do is just support. And, I pushed really hard. It's funny. So when he first came out, we did the boys' clothes and things like that. But his mom didn't want to cut his hair. He had longer hair. And so for a long time, that really bothered him. And I said, listen, let's let him cut his hair. No, because she was always kind of in the mindset of like, well, what if he changes his mind? What if he comes back? And I'm like, well, he can regrow his hair. It's just hair. Like,
Right.
and I know she was concerned from school and stuff like that. And we can get into that in a minute, but I really pushed hard. I was like, no, 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 let's let him cut his hair. He wants to look like a boy. He's always getting misgendered because of how long his hair was. Let's let him cut his
Yeah.
hair and style it more as a boy. And so she eventually relented or allowed us to do that. So we ended up doing it. But I was always kind of the big push behind trying to make him feel as comfortable as he
Yeah.
was or as he could be. So,
That's good. And you know what? And that's what ideally everyone should do. You
Yeah.
know, everyone
I,
should be,
yeah.
I mean, that's why we do what we do. You know, that's why we have, you know, we have families, or we create families. So we create families, and
Right.
we should strive to make them feel comfortable regardless of what their gender or sexual
Sure.
identity is.
Yeah. He had a friend who, I don't remember how they identify, but it's not important. That's their personal business. But I remember their parents were not accepting at all of
Mm,
anybody who, you know, unless they were straight and cisgendered, like period. Like
okay.
that's it, you know. And
Yeah.
I remember them crying one time when they came to stay with us for the night, you know, just a sleepover kind of thing. They're like, I just hate going home, and I hate it because I just feel, you know, that they would hate me. I can't tell them what I really feel inside because I'm afraid they would hate me and kick me out.
Oh, that's so
I think
terrible.
they eventually did come out, and I don't think
Mm,
they got kicked out. I don't know how they handled it. They're not really friends anymore, but I think they took it better than they thought they would. But just, I couldn't imagine that feeling that they had of, you know, hating being at home. And I think that's
right.
why I always feel bad thinking about my son trying to come out to me the first time, and I kind of push back. It's like how awful he must have felt for those 6 months, and I've always just kind of
Yeah.
hated myself for that. So, and you know, we don't always make the best decisions. That's the great thing about being a parent. You get to screw up a kid. So
Yeah.
that's what therapy's
Yeah,
for, I
and you know
guess.
what? You know, people try to write parenting guides and parenting books, but I
Yeah,
think they're
yeah.
all trash because every situation's different. And
Oh,
although
100%.
there probably is some wisdom in some of that type of material,
Sure.
at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you know, the relationship that a parent has with their child is super personal,
Yeah.
and there's not just any one approach to deal with the situation. So
Oh, of course. Yeah. And of course, hindsight's
now,
2020. So,
exactly, exactly. So now your son comes out.
mhm.
What did you happen to have, like, any particular worries about, you know, what that meant for his future?
I did actually. I remember thinking, and actually, I think I told him this. I said, you know, are you sure? Because now, while if you change your mind later and decide, you know what, I was wrong, I misunderstood how I felt, you know, that's fine. Never hold it against you. But I was like, the road you're going down is going to be difficult. It's not wildly accepted. Granted, it's way more accepted now than it would have been, you know, 20 years ago. Um, but it's definitely still not widely accepted. Then you have the whole, what about your dating pool? You know, because now you have less
Hmm.
people that fit into that, you know, Venn diagram
Right,
of who you find attractive, but also find you attractive.
right.
And he
And then there's
understood
all the
that, and
different
everything.
personality complications that are layered on top of all that.
Yeah, 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 exactly. And so yeah, so I did have some worries, still do, you know, from a future perspective. I mean, how's that? Again, luckily there's more and more protections coming about, but then we see politically some things, especially where I live, in the state I live in, you're starting to see, you know, the other side from the political side where they're trying to take away people's rights regarding, you know, their freedoms on how they identify and how they live. But let's see, but yeah, it definitely is a concern. You know, we've talked about wanting to travel abroad, but there's certain countries
Okay.
we can't go to
Right.
because of his lifestyle.
Definitely can't go to
And
Russia.
I
Definitely can't go there.
definitely can't go to Russia, can't go to pretty much any of the Middle East, even some countries in Europe would
Yep.
be difficult. Most aren't, which is great. Most are definitely more uh, accepting, but there are some that aren't. So it's things that we'd have to be aware of. So, so when, you
Has
know, with your
has
daughter, Mhm.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was to say with your daughter and her coming out, which I think, I don't know, I feel like it's simpler in that aspect because, okay, you just had to say, okay, now she's likes, you know, girls.
She likes girls. Yeah.
Was there anything, you know, did you have any kind of difficulty with any of that change in your life as far as the way you needed to raise her, treat her, anything? Did you like, for instance, sleepovers. Did you have concerns if she was
Oh,
going to a
no.
girl's sleepover versus
No.
if she, you know, was straight? You wouldn't have had it. Okay,
No, not really.
Um,
No,
no.
not really. Never once did that actually cross my mind, like, at all.
Okay.
The only thing that crossed my mind was just trying to get an understanding of where she saw her future.
Sure.
Did she want to have a family in the future?
Okay. Yeah.
What would that look like? Would she adopt?
Mhm.
Would she have one of her own?
Right.
So those are the sort of things that we discussed with her at the time.
Mhm.
And and no matter what, right, like, it's not like we're trying to dictate an outcome for her or a future for her. It's just
Right.
things that we as parents are curious about. I would love for her to have kids someday, because I think she
Sure.
is beautiful, and it would be a
Mhm.
shame not to spread some of that beauty around the world. But at the
Right.
same time, if it's something she doesn't see for herself or desire, I'm not going to stop that. I'm going to support whatever choice she makes. So to me,
Sure.
it was really more around that
Mhm.
aspect of it as opposed to anything else.
Sure.
Now, the one thing that, I'm just kind of thinking about it right now, that we have had to be conscious of is
Mhm.
certain family members. So
Right.
certain family members are still of the opinion that she is way too young to know her own sexuality. And
Right.
I beg to differ. I honestly think that most of us have a fairly decent idea of what that is. Even if we don't know how to describe it, we have a pretty good
Mhm.
idea of what that is when we're very little. For other people, it may be a journey. For some
Yeah.
people, it's discovering it through time. So I've heard of people that figure out what their sexuality is once they reach adulthood, you know?
Mhm. Sure.
So anyway, so we've had to educate and help facilitate certain interactions with
Mhm.
my wife's family members, because that's
Ah.
where a lot of that resistance comes from. When my mom
Mhm.
found out, she already had experience with it. So she's like, okay,
Right.
great.
Sounds great. Yeah.
And to her, as long as she's happy and healthy, that's all she cares about. She really honestly doesn't
Yeah.
care whether she likes boys or girls. She just wants
Sure.
her to be healthy. But on
Yeah.
the other side of the family, with my wife's family, it's part
Mhm.
of it is a political situation where
Right.
it's like, well, it's always in my face. Why is it in my face? Why is this show highlighting an LGBTQ individual as part of their show? Why did this episode get made? So they're
Right.
they're constantly getting upset over something, quite frankly, that should already be normalized. And
Yeah.
that those people don't really understand that this is all part of the process of
Mhm.
normalizing that gender identification or sexual identification. That's
Right.
all that is. And they just, and it's not really all that prevalent anyway. I think there could be more that could be done, but anyway, so that's a
Sure.
big sticking point over there. And so there has been
Yeah.
some situations where my daughter, she is very proud of her sexual identity, and she likes to tell people about it. So we've kind of had
Okay.
to coach her on, hey, listen, it's great. We're proud of you,
Yeah.
but you need to be aware that there's going to be people that are not going to like that you're having this discussion with them. So you have to be
Sure.
prepared for that situation. And so unfortunately,
Yeah.
we have to deal with it over on my wife's side of the family.
And it's funny because it's on my wife's side of the family too that it was where we had our most concern. And when he came out, it wasn't much longer before we had basically told the family because we wanted them to be aware. And on my wife's
Hmm.
side of the family, they're very religious from their Southern Baptist. And, typically they preach that, it's all wrong and all that stuff.
Yep.
And so I was really concerned about that. But actually, my ex father in law was way more accepting than I ever thought he would be.
Wow.
He was like,
Great.
listen, first off, it's my
I've
only
met him,
grandchild.
and that is
Yeah.
surprising. I mean,
Yeah.
he
Yeah, it
never
is.
did anything around me that I was like, oh
No.
man, like this guy,
Yeah.
like I never
Well, it's
felt that he had any that, I never felt anything negative, you know what I mean, from him.
right.
Now, I that
Right.
could also be because I couldn't understand a single word he said. because of his thick
Yeah,
Southern
most people
accent.
have problems.
Yeah,
Well, I don't even know if
but
that's a Southern accent. I don't know what accent you call that, but it's
oh my
funny because only
goodness.
I can. It takes a while, but I can actually understand him now. No problems, actually. Talk to him on the phone, have long conversations. But yeah, most people can't understand him. I couldn't originally either. But yeah, he was like, listen, it's my only grandchild, so I don't want to push him away. I have to
Yep.
accept him because I don't want to lose him, you know. And
Yeah.
my mother-in-law was less understanding. It really bothered her, and still does actually. So my ex-father-in-law, he's pretty good about using um, my son's preferred name, using he, him
Great.
pronouns most of
Yep.
the time, which I don't fault them when they mess it up. But my mother-in-law almost refuses, like at this point. She still loves
Yeah.
him, obviously, but yeah,
Sure.
it's tough. Like he hates. I mean, he kind of hates going over there. He had to visit for Christmas, and he's kind of miserable during that time because of it, and it sucks for him, and I
Yeah.
hate that. But and it's. I think that was the thing, that made it was just difficult for me as a parent because I've known this child for at that point 12 years as female.
Hmm.
She, her, and their birth name, right? Their given name. And now I have to use he, him, and their, new preferred name. And I've been really good about it. Like even now, when I tell stories about him as a baby or whatever, it's he, him. That's what I do. It makes it
Yep.
easier,
Yep.
honestly. And for anybody out there that, as a parent that's dealing with it, just always use the preferred pronouns. It just makes it easier. You don't have to try to switch back. Oh, well, then they were identified. No, just
Right.
use the
Right. Right.
preferred.
Yep.
It makes them feel more comfortable when you're telling stories about them when they're younger. Um, it's just better. Like that's some advice I would give to any parent dealing with that because it definitely just makes it easier. Because I've seen my ex-wife when she would tell stories when before he had come out, she would use he, her, or their dead name, which I hate that term, but I understand it. Um,
Yep.
and it's just very hard. So she's constantly messing up and would use the wrong pronouns. Almost always use the right name at least, but
Hmm.
pronoun wise was always messing it up. And it got to a point, it was funny because if I messed up, he'd give me a hard time because it's like, well, you never mess up. So I'm going to give you a hard time about it. But if she messed up, he just kind of like, whatever. It's just
Yeah.
normal. So
Whatever.
it didn't
Yeah.
bother him as much. And so, but anyway,
What
so that's definitely some advice I give.
What
We're
about
going to ask.
school? Was there any impact on his school life?
Yeah. So school life, yeah, definitely was impacted. He had a lot of friends that were very supportive. Some of them also had come out with whatever sexual or gender identities at the time, which made it accepting. They even had a club at school, the LGBTQ club, I believe is what it was called. So that was good. The difficulty were the non-accepting people, which there are a lot of.
Yeah.
I've,
Oh, I bet. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it was really difficult. I mean, so now my child has come out as transgender, identifies as a boy. That was very difficult dealing with teachers. A lot of teachers were super accepting and they would use the preferred name, but it was always that awkwardness at the beginning of school because it's written down their legal name and it's like, no, I prefer to be called this. And generally they were okay with it. We had some pushback with some teachers that wanted us to fill out a form, or not a form, but basically send them a note saying, yes, it's okay to call
Hmm.
them by this other name. I don't know. Maybe they're just trying to cover their rear ends on that. But it was always bad when they're substitute teachers because the substitute teacher would always call them by their dead name. And it was to the point like some kids would be like, well, who's that? We don't even know who that is because it had been
Oh,
2 or 3
wow.
months since they heard that name.
Yeah.
But then you had the jerk kids that were like, oh, no, that's not their name. This is their dead name. And you would call them. It was just to be jerks. And it got to the point that for his senior year, we ended up enrolling him just on an online school to finish out his high school because he was getting targeted at school by a couple of kids, and the administration's hands were just tied because of the way the laws are and the way the rules are. So he would use the boys' bathroom because if he used the girls' bathroom, they'd see him come in and they think, oh, why is this boy using the bathroom? And that would cause a big problem. So he would use the boys'
Sure.
room.
Yep.
And he had one boy that started following him to the boys' room.
Oh,
And then
wow.
he would tell the security, oh, I felt uncomfortable because, this person's actually a girl and all of that. And the vice principal would get
Wow.
involved. And the vice principal
That is
was very
so
supportive of,
crappy.
Yeah. And the thing is because the way the rules are written, that kid was actually right. He's actually able to do that. And my child was actually in the wrong. And so, when they go into the front of the vice principal's like, well, just use the bathroom in the nurse's office. It's like, okay, well, you're telling me that I've got to walk down 3 flights of stairs and all the way across the school if I have to go to the bathroom, you know, which half the
Yeah,
time
so they
it's
basically have to plan
occupied or
out all of
taken.
their bathroom breaks. Yeah,
Exactly.
unbelievable.
And my son pushed back on that. He was like, listen, he's like, if you're going to tell me that, he's like, I'm going to contact the ACLU right now so they can have a conversation with you because you're now impeding my rights and blah, blah, blah. And of course,
Yep.
the, again, the vice principal's hands are just tied. And he's like, listen, I don't care, that you use the other bathroom. I don't. He's like, and I'm sorry that this boy is targeting you, and it was just a whole thing. And so we ended up, just to get around that, decided to let him be homeschooled this year to finish out his high school, which is sad because now he's not going to go to prom. We are going to have a graduation that we're going to go to, but it's going to be with people that he's never met or seen
Never
before.
met. Yeah.
Yeah, so and in some ways I think he's happier because he's not dealing with the bullying, but the other side I think he's sad that he doesn't have those friends. Now, luckily, he has things that he does on the weekends and stuff like that to get that
Sure.
companionship. So, but
So he's had to
um,
sacrifice some milestones
oh
that
yeah, 100%.
that
Yeah.
the average person
Yep.
doesn't even have to think about.
Oh yeah,
So that
exactly.
I was watching a TED talk actually earlier today,
Hmm.
and it was by this trans female
Sure.
talking about, and I only got about halfway through because then we kind of needed to jump in and record this episode.
Right.
But one of the points that they were making was super interesting, and it's something that I think the average person doesn't really think about, which is all these little things
Hmm.
that specifically I don't want to put more. Okay. All these little things that LGBTQ people have to sacrifice. And
Right.
this person was talking about holding hands. They were like, I cannot publicly hold hands with my partner. And I can't do that because
Hmm.
if I'm walking down the sidewalk, I'm
Right.
constantly going to be on guard. Who's around us? How are they reacting to us holding hands? Are
Sure.
somebody going to say something to me? I could be
Yeah.
having the most wonderful date in my entire life, and somebody
Hmm.
can say the F word to me
Right.
and completely ruin that night for me, and I would never want to remember it ever again. So,
Right.
something as small and simple as holding hands is
Yeah.
something that we have to sacrifice. And then when
Hmm.
you dig into it, there's more sacrifices, more of these little sacrifices that they have to make that keep adding up more and more and more and more that really make a huge impact on their lives. So, and I really didn't think about that in those terms. And you talking about your son, the whole
Right.
bathroom situation is one small thing, right?
Right.
But there's other things that he's got to worry about too. You also
Hmm.
mentioned about being called their dead name in class by a substitute teacher, right? That's
Right.
another thing. That's another little thing, right? Yes,
Yeah.
you're being called the wrong name. It
Hmm.
doesn't, on the surface, it doesn't sound like a big deal, you know.
Right.
But when you add up all these other different little things together, they're huge, right? And they make a huge impact. And I think that most people, and I'm including myself in that because this wasn't something that I really thought about. I don't think most people think about that or really realize that all these movement, this LGBTQ plus movement and all the stuff that we're seeing in the media about normalizing LGBTQ plus lifestyles, um, really add up to making a huge impact on their lives and
Yes.
matter, and people should care more than what they do. And it
Right.
shouldn't be trivialized.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's funny that a group of people who are the minority in this country as far as
Mhm.
political size, but yet they hold such a huge amount of power because of the way their base turns out to vote, right or wrong about
Yep.
a lot of things. I think it's
Right.
funny how they're more concerned about how it's going to impact them when it has no impact to them. It does not change their
None
life
whatsoever.
one bit. Um,
None
like
whatsoever.
I remember telling my son for years when he was after he came out, but before. Now he's more comfortable with it. He goes to the men's room when we go out someplace, to a restaurant or whatever. But I remember when he was younger, he's like, but I just feel weird. I'm like, just go to the men's room. I said, men don't talk to each other. We go in, we
Nope.
do our business, and we leave. They're not going to look at
We
you.
don't even
I don't
we
look
don't
at
even look at
people.
each other in the eye.
No, exactly. I'm like, just use the men's room. They're not going to care,
Yeah.
and now he's realized that. And, however, he's got to go in, he's got to find a stall. Sometimes the
Right.
doors don't lock, so that makes him feel uncomfortable. So if I'm with him and we're in the bathroom together, he'll tell like, hey, this door doesn't lock. And then I'll just kind of stick, to make sure that nobody can mess with this door. But I get that. I mean, if I go to the restroom and I'm in a stall, I want the door to lock. So I can imagine
Right.
how he feels about it. But yeah, it's just funny that the group that has like it doesn't affect them. It just doesn't. It does not affect them. So what? You don't like seeing
Not
two
one bit.
people of the same gender make out. Oh well, that it does not affect you. And if you don't like it, don't watch it. It's easy.
Exactly.
Like
And it doesn't take away
I don't know.
your right to do the same thing. It doesn't take away your
Exactly.
right
Yeah.
to hold somebody else's hand.
Yeah. It's
So,
nuts.
so there's a somewhat unique topic that applies to your son that does not apply to my daughter, which
Sure.
is conversion.
Yeah.
Does I know at one point you were talking about that with your son, and I think there was a
Hmm.
lot of back and forth with that discussion. Where
Yeah.
where's that at, and what are your thoughts on being a teenager and going through conversion therapy of some sort?
Yeah. So I'll tell you the things that I've read and, kind of give you just the gist of that. And that's that there's no consensus on the right thing to do there. I think in the end, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a licensed medical professional or mental professional in any way, but in my opinion, if it's going to help their mental health, then you should do it.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the physical transitioning, such as surgeries, not until they're of age. They need to make that decision when they're over 18. Um, that's when it should happen. It shouldn't happen at a younger age. When it comes to the things that you can do with hormones, and that's where I go into if it's better for their mental health. So we pushed back for a while on it because we didn't have the understanding. We thought that the hormone therapy was a one-way path, that if they did change their mind later, which there are a huge amount that do. There's a huge amount that, I think it's like 30 or 40%. Don't quote me on that, but I do think it's quite a large number that actually later on say, you know what, I made a mistake. I'm not this, whatever they identified as.
Yeah.
But hormone therapy is not a one-way street. All of it is reversible. It takes time for it to reverse, but you just stop taking the hormones and they would reverse. Some of the things that it does would reverse. And when I learned that, I became a bigger proponent of it. I ended up
Yeah.
talking my ex-wife into it. I said, listen, you want your child to be happy, right? And she's like, yeah. I said, well, he's not happy right now at all. I said, we kept telling him, oh, when you turn 18, you can do this. It's like, that's only a couple years away. Why not let him be happy now? And I
Right.
remember
Yeah.
how excited he was when we were like, listen, we decided that you can, start hormone therapy and get testosterone. It was like Christmas Day for him. He was so
Oh, that's
excited.
awesome.
And it's
That's
like,
great.
yeah, should have done that sooner. But again, that's because we don't have enough information, at least not what's given to us. You have to go get that
Yeah.
information. And one of the things that I did, I actually attended a conference. I can't remember the name. I think Gender Infinity, maybe, but it's a whole conference and it's talking about, you know, transgender and non-binary and all the different gender identities kind of thing. And I actually sat through two seminars that actually went through the entire transition process.
Okay.
For male to female, female to male, and it's a lot.
Great idea.
And and even he has kind of changed his mind how far he wants to take things, just because of
Oh,
how
okay.
invasive some of those procedures can be. But that's his decision and how far he wants to take
Right.
it, whatever makes him feel comfortable. And and luckily now with him being on testosterone and some other birth control stuff that we've done, it's limited things such as menstrual cycles and things like that to an extent. I think and I just couldn't imagine, you feel awful. You bumped your mic. You feel awful because you identify as a man, but then every month you're reminded that you're female, and
Right.
be miserable in the process. No woman
Right.
wants to
Right.
have their menstrual cycle, period. Except for the woman who
Nope.
might think she's pregnant and doesn't want to be. She's the only one that wants a menstrual
Right.
cycle. So
Right.
she's going, please God, let me have that period. But yeah, so I mean that's something else that again, going for the mental health side of things, that I think as a parent you want your child to be happy, and if that's going to make them happy and there's no adverse side effects other than ones they want, such as for him, he wants a deeper voice, he wants to grow hair, he wants to, it will actually change the way your bone structure is a little bit, the way you displace
Oh,
fat
okay.
throughout your body, because women typically have their fat around their hips, it's just where they locate.
Right.
For men, it's in their belly. It'll actually redistribute and do all that stuff. But again, it is reversible. The voice thing, yeah, it'll change your voice. But if you do stop taking it, it will slowly over time revert back. The same
Yeah.
way for the bone structure and for the body fat. So if they do change their mind later, then they do. And there's no harm, no foul on any of that. So anyways, that's kind of where I am on that whole
Yeah, that's
transition
good. I mean,
process.
I
And
just learned a whole lot right now just
yeah.
listening to you talk through that. So here's something that I do admire
Hmm.
is the fact that, and you touched on it yourself. You are not given this information yourself. It's not given to you, right? This information is
Right.
not. No one comes to you. You don't go to the doctor,
Yeah.
and the doctor says, "Hey, here's some reading material or some videos you should watch about this subject."
Hmm.
You had to go and find it,
Yeah.
and
Um,
I admire the fact that you did that.
well, I appreciate that. Yeah, so I will give credit to one of his doctors, who is an endocrinologist. He actually is the one that did give me, at least as far as how the hormones work, more
Yeah,
information on that. Because if you read online,
great.
a lot of the sites will be like, no, it's permanent and it's forever, which is what I thought. But again, it depends on who the source is and what's their
Yep.
agenda, for how they're giving the information. But once I found that from that doctor, I was like, oh, well, then I need to do more research on this. And that's when I started looking into it. Like, no, 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 okay, then this doctor's right. It's not anything that's permanent, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's not like they teach us this in school. You don't learn about this in
No.
school. You're not, it's not given to you. It's not on TV every day, that you're going to learn it. It's something that, yeah, you have to want to learn more about it and go and figure it out. So, but
So,
yeah.
what advice do you have for other parents? Any lessons learned that stick out to you?
Yeah. Lesson learned one, just be supportive as much as you can. You don't have to go overboard. Talk to them, ask them what they want. Um, do your own research to learn enough to understand what may or may not be the right path for them, but definitely listen to them. And in the end, you want your kids to be happy. So you do that within reason. Um, I think that's probably my best advice as far as, because we don't want to spoil your kids crazy amounts. But that's where you're the adult. You have to make the decision that's really the best for them. But definitely keep in mind their happiness and how their life's affected by it when you do that. So I guess it's
Yeah, and I agree. Be supportive because it's not about you; it's about
yes,
them.
yes, 100%. So
All right, I
going
think
with
that's
that.
an episode. So that's it for today's episode. We will be releasing these bi-weekly as video to YouTube and as an audio version on all your podcasting platforms. So please make sure you subscribe and check out the links in the description for more content. Titan, what's the topic for our next episode?
On
Yep.
our next episode, it's talking about the family effects of the pandemic and the impacts that it had to us, our relationships, our children, and how we managed to cope through all of that. So make sure you join us.
All right, sounds great. Bye for now.